I remember my grandma telling us this story when I was a kid. It was a big deal for her to talk about it, like she'd kept it hidden for so long, and now it was finally coming out. She was still living in Laos back then, in her 30s, when this happened. This was before phones in big cities, so you'd have to imagine everything was quiet, just farmland and forest around you. She was a hard-working woman, my grandma. She had 4 kids to look after, one of whom was my mom. Her husband, my grandpa, was a hunter, real strong, real steady. But then one day while he was out hunting, he died in an accident, just like that. They found him a few miles away in the woods, and nobody really knew what happened. Maybe he fell. Maybe it was some animal. I think that day broke her heart in a way that never fully healed. She cried so much when they buried him. All her friends and family came to the funeral. She must have felt so alone after that. Months went by, and even though she still went about her daily life, you could tell something had changed. She'd put on a strong face, kept working on the farm to provide for her kids, but there was a quiet sadness. One day, she went to the farm alone as usual, but this time she asked her brother to watch over her kids so she could stay focused on the work. She didn't have the same strength she used to, I think. It was tiring for her, but that was her way of keeping the family going. The day was winding down, and she had been working for hours under the hot sun. As the sky began to turn red and gold with the sunset, she heard something. A creepy, almost inhuman howl coming from the stream downhill. Now, this was a place she knew like the back of her hand, so any strange sound would stand out. She stopped what she was doing and listened, heart pounding. She'd never heard anything like it before. She thought about the stories she'd heard as a child, about ghosts and spirits that lurked in the forests, and a shiver ran down her spine. Whatever that sound was, she knew she didn't want to stick around to find out. So she picked up her things and walked quickly back to the farmhouse, the small one they used out in the fields for breaks or staying overnight if they had to. Once she was inside, she felt a bit safer. She started a fire and began cooking some rice and vegetables, trying to get rid of that uneasy feeling. She was just trying to focus on the sound of the crackling fire and the warmth in front of her, but her nerves were still jumpy. After a while, she decided to throw out some of the scraps outside. It was getting pretty dark by then, the kind of dark where you could barely make out what's around you. She took a few steps out the door, and then she heard it. A strange noise, like a low gurgle or a wet shuffle, just a little way ahead of her. She stopped dead in her tracks, squinting to see what it was. At first, she couldn't make out much, just a shadow moving around slowly. But as her eyes adjusted, her heart nearly stopped. It was a corpse, a rotting, decaying corpse, shuffling around and picking up things from the ground, like it was searching for food or something. Its clothes were tattered, and parts of its skin looked like they'd been eaten away. She was frozen, just watching it as it bent down, scooping up what looked like dirt and stuffing it into its mouth. And then, as if it could sense her looking, the corpse stopped. It turned slowly to face her, and their eyes met. Or, well, where its eyes should have been. The next second, the corpse began to walk towards her, arms outstretched, moving with this slow, jerky gait. That was all it took. She turned and bolted back inside the farmhouse, slamming the door behind her. She barred it, pushed whatever she could find in front of it, and held her breath, praying it would just go away. But it didn't. She could hear it outside, shuffling closer, scratching at the walls and the door as if trying to get in. The banging grew louder, the walls shook with each hit, and she could feel herself starting to panic. She didn't know what else to do, so she started to pray, begging her husband to help her. She whispered, pleaded, even cried a bit, calling out his name over and over. She kept whispering softly, "Please, come help me. I need you." She was so desperate she wasn't even sure if she was thinking straight, but she kept calling out to him, hoping for something, anything. And then suddenly it went quiet, just like that. Not a single sound outside, like the world had gone completely still. She waited, not daring to breathe, listening for any hint of movement, but there was nothing. Finally, after what felt like hours, she took a small step toward the wall and peeked through one of the gaps in the wooden slats. Outside, in the pale moonlight, she saw a tiger. It was sitting right there, just a few yards from the farmhouse, watching her door. It was massive, bigger than any tiger she'd ever seen, with a thick coat and piercing eyes. But it wasn't moving at all, almost like it was waiting for something. And for some reason, the sight of that tiger didn't scare her. It felt familiar, like it was there for her. She couldn't make sense of it, but she didn't dare go out or do anything. She just sat down in the corner, trembling, heart racing, and after a while she must have worn herself out, because she started to feel drowsy. Eventually, she drifted off to sleep, right there on the floor. In her dream, she saw her husband. He looked just like he did in life, strong and calm with a warm smile. He told her that the tiger was him, that he'd heard her calling and came back to protect her. He said he would keep watch over her tonight, but that from now on, she shouldn't come to the farm alone. "Bring someone with you next time," he said gently. Then he told her he had to go far away, but that one day, when she was old and it was her time, he'd come back to guide her so she wouldn't have to walk alone. When she woke up, it was dawn. The first light of morning was coming in, and she could hear the birds singing outside. She got up, went to the window and looked out, but the tiger was gone. The ground outside was undisturbed, and there was no sign of the corpse either. It was like none of it had ever happened, but she knew better. Years later, when she was much older and lying on her deathbed, she finally told us this story. I was there sitting beside her, listening to every word. And right before she passed, she looked toward the door with a peaceful smile, as if she was seeing someone she loved. And then she was gone, just like that, with that same gentle smile on her face. After she passed, the family wanted to honor her last wishes. She'd never remarried, never even considered it, I think. She always kept a little drawing of my grandpa tucked away, and whenever we'd ask her about it, she'd just smile and say that he was still watching over her. When it was time to make the arrangements, the relatives all agreed on one thing: she'd be buried next to him. There was this little plot of land where they'd laid my grandpa to rest all those years back. It was under a big tree with wildflowers that would spring up every rainy season. She'd been to that spot countless times, talking to him like he was still right there with her. It only felt right that she would lie there too. So the day came, and we all gathered to say our goodbyes. As they lowered her down next to him, it felt like closing a chapter. There was this kind of peace, like she was finally going back to him, like he'd kept his promise from that night all those years ago, and maybe, just maybe, he was waiting right there, ready to guide her once again, just like he said he would. Even now, when I think about her, I picture her in that old farmhouse, hearing those strange sounds, feeling all that fear and calling out for him. And I picture him answering, coming back as that huge protective tiger, just to keep her safe one last time. That's the kind of love they had, a love that reached beyond even death. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you did, check out more of my videos on the screens above or visit my channel for even more. Don't forget to subscribe for future updates. Stay safe and take care.